a very long time ago. I was in third grade, and my third grade teacher looked a lot like me. I grew up in a town in Rockland County where there weren't a lot of Armenians. And I became very fond of Mrs. Harley, and I then soon found out that Mrs. Harley was half Armenian. So, of course, my mother made sure that she was invited to everything, and they became fast friends. And fast forward or rewind, whichever way you want to look at it, Sierra reached out to me via social media to say, like, hey, I think you're friends with my aunt, and I'm interested in learning about, some more about the Armenian culture as far as cooking is concerned, and can you help me with connecting me with some different people? So I connected her with Lynn Valerian at St. Leon's, and Sierra went and met with the women at the Women's Guild and made chorek. What did you make first?
Yeah,
chorek? Right before COVID.
Yeah.
So she was supposed to then continue to learn string cheese. And from there, she launched an incredible business, which it's really amazing what you've put together and how you've networked and who you've met along the way and built this whole big thing on your own while working a full-time job on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Nancy, when you speak about your mom inviting Sierra's aunt, give me a picture of your mom's involvement. What was life like for Armenians then as you grew up? Because the influence you've had from your mom is very similar to what we'll be hearing from Sierra.
Yes. So my mom, both my parents were very involved at St. Leon's. And again, once my mother learned that Anita was Armenian, they just became fast friends, and she sort of took her under her wing. And then she met your grandmother, and they did lots of things. They did lots of things together. There was a nice network, and especially in a town where there really weren't a lot of Armenians in Pearl River, New York.
We really, the history of the American Armenian has not been written. There are so many fascinating stories, and I wish we would have more writers to write about their growing up in America, especially at the set time where it was not fashionable to be Armenian. It was not fashionable to speak Armenian. Everything and everywhere was integration, just get to be as American as possible. It's not like what we are experiencing today, where people are more open and they are proud of their culture, free of their cultures, etc. What I'd like to do is go to Sierra. Sierra, I don't know where to begin, but what are some of the special moments you remember of your grandma? And I know you said that she or the family escaped Izmir or Smyrna. Tell us something you have heard or you know of the story.
Yeah, sure. So something I remember most about my grandmother was how great of a storyteller she was. I don't know that I will do her justice, but when I was growing up, she used to talk to me about, her experience being Armenian. Her family moved to Washington Heights when she was young, and she was first born in America. And the way that she really brought people together the most was through food. And for me, a lot of my connection to being Armenian was through food. So, but her father was back and forth between New York and in Smyrna.
Really?
He worked in carpet sales in Yonkers, New York, and eventually he moved the whole family here. I think he had an ear to the ground in Smyrna and knew that the fire was coming, and was able to get them to New York, where then they had my grandmother, who was named Azadwi, but then later called Frida, and that's kind of the origin story. But really, there was an Armenian community there in Washington Heights that was very strong at the time as well.
Many people could relate to the Armenian community in Washington Heights. There is a product, a very, very creative name, Hamov, and Stay High. Where did this whole thing, what inspired you for Hamov? What is the story behind Hamov?
So for me, food has always been a vehicle of love and culture, taught to me by my grandmother and also my father. He was always cooking when I was growing up as well. But with her, we would always gather at her house every weekend to eat meals. I heard a lot about, always my dad's house growing up was like the country house for everyone in the city. So everyone would come up from the Heights or, you know, wherever in Manhattan and line up to eat Frida's food and cooking, and she would cook all day long, and no one would come there and leave with an empty stomach. It was very, very important to her. And so I just have really vivid memories of her cooking, like never using a cutting board. Everything was with a paring knife in her hand. So a lot of, just always felt like she had magical hands. And when I started cooking, it was really important to me to learn the things that she used to make and to continue carrying on that culture. It was very important to her in everything that she did and the way that she spoke and the things that she spoke about. So it was in turn really important to me.
What are the contents in the jars of Hamov? There is something you have publicized. Give us some type of ingredients.
So Hamov started as 3 different spreads that were just inspired by Armenian flavors. So they're not real. One is red pepper and walnut that people, liken to mahamra, but it's not, it doesn't have breadcrumbs, it doesn't have pomegranate molasses, so it's not quite as sweet. Another is parsley and tahini, and that's quite earthy and very herbaceous, as you can imagine. And the last one was walnut and date, which was really supposed to be sweet, a little bit more like baklava or something like that. And Hamov actually is one of the only Armenian words I know. So I actually grew up with my grandmother. Every time she would feed me, she would say Hamov, and I would be embarrassed because I was little, and she would not stop saying it until I said it back. And every time I said it, she would have a smile on her face. She was so proud to pass that forward.
What was your connection over the years with the Armenian community at large?
That's a great question. Nancy, when you were telling the story about how you found out that your teacher was Armenian, I feel like that's what it's been like for me, like these little surprises of meeting Armenian people along the way and building community through those bonds. I think, Nancy, you've really introduced me to a lot of people in your community and given me a lot of support throughout the years. And recently, in more recent years, I met some girls on Instagram through Hamov who were interested in my brand and supporting me and helping me. And now we've together kind of gone on to create Stay High, to bring together more community and more makers and artists and writers and creatives that are in the New York area. So,
Nancy, what do you think of what Sierra just said?
Amazing, and that how she went from learning the fundamentals, as she already expressed, from her grandmother, to building her own business, and now really this Stay High that you're. Tell me more about that. That's in October 21st, right, in Brooklyn?
Yes.
So that's like a whole nother business venture, because 2 or 3 business ventures weren't enough. So she has.
Yeah. Well, I actually took the year off of farmers markets because my product Hamov is not shelf stable, and so I was making it fresh every single week for the markets while also working full time. So it became really grueling and intense. And I thought taking the year off would help me take some time and relax a little bit to figure out how to make a product that wasn't perishable. But then I got restless, and I thought, my boyfriend is a painter and he's also Armenian, and I thought of all these other Armenian creatives and artists that I've met along the way through this journey. A girl I know who's a video editor, someone who does ceramics, and so there's just so many incredible talents within the community that are so, I feel like in a lot of ways it's like impossible to be Armenian and not be inspired in some way by being Armenian. And so I really wanted to showcase that. And I feel like New York is interesting because there is a strong community, but it's not as prominent as you might see on the West Coast. And so I really wanted to highlight that here.
So tell us about Stay High.
So it's a one-day event on October 21st in Brooklyn, New York, at the Invisible Jog, which is an open space in a gallery. And it will bring together a variety of different artisans and makers to do like a pop-up shop, but we'll also be hosting dances, performances, and hoping to have a few panel conversations as well around food as a vehicle for culture, and also around generational trauma, which I think is very very prevalent in the European.
Yeah, I'll never forget that. It's amazing. You're up next.